So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our live webinar on leveraging Sage Intacct for nonprofits to be able to achieve their mission success. If you have any questions as we're going through today's webinar and demonstration, just go ahead and place them in the chat because we've set aside time to answer any questions. And we'll also be sending out a recording of the webinar after we finalize today. Nice to meet everybody. My name's Jane, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm the Sage Intacct Consulting Manager over here at CBIZ CompuData, and I manage our Sage Intacct practice. I'm responsible for everything from scoping prospects all the way into getting them implemented and live on Intacct. And I've been working in Intacct for 5 years, both as an end user and as an implementer. I'm a CPA, so I've got a strong accounting background, and prior to getting into Intacct as an implementer, I worked in corporate accounting in a variety of industries, so financial services, tech, nonprofits, and then prior to that, I was a nonprofit auditor. So if we just jump to a quick agenda of what we're going to cover in today's webinar, we're going to do an introduction, an overview of what we'll be covering. We'll be actually doing a live demonstration of the product, where we'll take you through reports and dashboards. We'll take you through some grant items within Sage Intacct, and then along with those grants, we'll cover some automation of purpose-based restriction or purpose-based revenue. And then we'll talk through why some other nonprofits, similar to maybe some of your organizations, have chosen Sage Intacct. And then, like I said, lastly, at the end of the webinar, we'll save some time for any questions and discussion. And then anything we don't get to, you can always reach out to Michelle and I afterward, and we can set up a call or answer any questions via email. So just a little bit about CBIZ CompuData. We are a leading Sage Diamond partner, and we have over 30 years of experience migrating and implementing Intacct along with other Sage solutions. We've got a team of certified Sage Intacct consultants that are dedicated to supporting industries. One specifically is the nonprofit industry. And we really have a team that has a deep understanding of the nonprofit industry that can help you guys deliver a solution that's tailored to your organization and that will help you enhance your operational efficiencies. And just a couple other accolades on here. We're recognized as an award-winning VAR we have been recognized for an award-winning VAR for 20 years. And we boast 98% customer satisfaction and accolades from Accounting Today's Top 100 and a few other mentioned groups here. So I think we can jump into the demo now. And I will go ahead and steal the screen share. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. Michelle, are you just able to confirm that you can see Intacct? Just want to make sure I'm not screen sharing the wrong.
Yes, correct.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So as I mentioned, for the next 20 minutes here, we're going to do a live demo of Intacct. Again, just plug your questions into the chat, and then we'll cover those at the back end. So what you're looking at the moment is a home screen of Intacct. Throughout today's demo, I'll be navigating out to a couple of different spots using what's called the application picker, which is this drop down in the top left. So a lot of our clients, specifically our nonprofits, will start their day in Intacct in what's called a dashboard. So that's what we're looking at here. And at the top of our screen, we're seeing some components of a dashboard. These are called performance cards. I can drill into any of these components and really anything throughout this dashboard and get down to a really granular level of detail. So for example, if I were to drill into my 7.254 of expenditures, that's going to take me to a report that supports that 7.254. And then even further from there, I can drill into this office supplies line, for example, and I can see a general ledger detail that makes up this 321,074. And then even further than that, I could drill into individual transactions, whether those be journal entries, whether those be accounts payable bills. So we'll see here, this line is a $4,000 accounts payable bill. I can actually get back to that original bill So all from my very high level dashboard in this performance card, I'm able to drill into detail behind a transaction. We'll also see on these performance cards, there are little red and green indicators indicating positive or negative trends. We've also got financial reports on our dashboard. So I pulled in a couple of financial reports that are pertinent to a lot of our nonprofits. That's the statement of activities, statement of financial position, budget versus actual year to date, and then a statement of functional expense. And we'll be covering more reporting in just a second here. But before we dig into reporting, just note that a couple of other components that a lot of our nonprofits use in these dashboards are charts and graphs. So on the right here, we have a bar chart. We can also do donut, pie, really any kind of chart you can think of. And the same exact way our performance cards are drillable, our bar graphs are as well. So I could drill into this and see a GL detail behind any of the numbers on this screen. And then additionally in our dashboards, a lot of our nonprofit clients will plug in quick links to reports. So on the left side here, I'm seeing maybe this budget report is a report that I use pretty regularly. Instead of having to navigate to that report via my menu, I can click here, or I can add a link here and then click directly into the report. And along with that, I can pull in tasks. So if I'm someone who approves journal entries or bills or purchasing transactions, instead of having to navigate through my menu, I can add that to my dashboard and drill into that. A couple other features of dashboards, just general features. So Intacct is all dimensional based. So what I mean by that is if you're used to an account string with maybe a 4-digit natural account dash a 2-digit department dash a 3-digit project, for example, all of those items live in separate lists in Intacct. So we'll see our first example of a dimension in this particular dashboard where I can actually come in and I have the ability, since I have my department set up in my department dimension, to filter this dashboard and just see activity in the communications department, for example. So we saw that all of these numbers dropped. We're going to see a lot of other dimensional examples throughout this demo. One other one, if we're living in a multi-entity environment, so if we envision that I'm currently the controller or CFO that's viewing a holistic snapshot of my organization, but I want to drill into one specific entity, maybe the foundation, I can filter by the foundation. And now I'm just going to see activity in this dashboard that's pertinent to the foundation, which is one of my few entities. I can organize this dashboard however I'd like. This just happens to be how this demo dashboard is organized. I can permission this to specific folks, so I can exclude or include folks to be able to view this dashboard. And then lastly here, before I jump into some more specific reporting items, just wanted to call out that everything we're seeing here is financial information, but we do allow for statistical information within dashboards and reporting as well. So here's just a sample of some statistical information that's captured in this demo environment: number of visitors, number of events sponsored, number of members. We have the ability to track statistical information as well. So if we jump back into our CFO dashboard here, I'm going to come into my statement of activities here. And if I'm someone who has the proper permissions, I can actually click this pencil and this will take me out to my statement of activities. Let me just make sure. Sorry, Michelle, do you mind confirming that it switched? I just want to make sure I'm sharing my full screen and not just my Intacct homepage.
Correct. You can see the financial report writer.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. So I'm in my financial report writer. If we remember what this report, actually, let me look back. If we remember what this report looked like in the dashboard when we ran it as of 12/31/2020, it looked like this. So we have a report here with our operating revenue, our expenditures. Another example of where those dimensions really come in handy for our nonprofits is, let's say that I wanted to break this grant revenue line out and see the grants that actually support this 1.334 in grant revenue. I can come into the rows of my financial report writer and very easily I could say, instead of summary level data, I want to be able to see this grant revenue by grant. If we preview what this looks like, this is going to take that 1.334 and it's going to break it out and show us that breakdown of grant revenue by grants. If we take one more look at how these dimensions come into play in these rows, let's say personnel expenses, we really don't want to see this summarized. Instead, we want to see it broken out by department. Because our departments live in a dimension and because Intacct utilizes that dimensional based accounting, I'm able to come in, take my personnel expenses, and easily break it down by the departments that these expenses live in. Couple more features here. Let's say I'm going to revert back. I really like the way it was presented originally, but instead I want to play around with my columns. We have the ability to use that same sort of dimensionality in our columns. So we can come in and say, maybe I want my without restriction column to actually be expanded by department. Just to see an example of how this might work, I can come in, expand by department, and then this is going to show me that without restrictions column blown up by department instead of just having it in that one individual column in a summarized fashion. And then just to see one more example of how easy this report writing is, I can expand by any dimension, but I can also expand by time period. So if I wanted to see my actual and I wanted to see that blown out by every month in 2020, instead of seeing it by my departments, here's my year 2020 now blown out by month. So it really just shows the value of being able to use our financial report writer and report capabilities in combination with dimensions in order to view reporting in a split, broken out fashion. Just a couple of other items here on our reports before I move on. So we have the ability to view an audit trail on any of our reports. So this is going to show me every single action anyone has ever taken in my organization on this report. And then I also have the ability to view a version history of every version of this report so that if I inadvertently save a version of this report that I didn't mean to, I can restore an old version. And then the final thing I'll mention on the report writer is our ability to duplicate. So as a Sage Intacct customer, Intacct starts you out with about, I think it's up to 37 reports just as a starting point. What a lot of my clients do is they keep those 37 or so reports, but then they'll duplicate. So I can easily take this existing report, rename it something new, and then I can go into my financial report writer and actually edit that duplicated version without messing with that original report. So you get those 35 reports as a starting point as a nonprofit, and then you can also duplicate reports or just start from the ground up and create brand new reports. We'll quickly touch on some multi-entity pieces of Intacct. So at the moment, I am viewing this from the perspective of a CFO or controller who has the ability to view everything. So they can view our foundation, our community center, our clinic, our 3 entities. We may have a use case, and a lot of our nonprofits have use cases where they need to restrict a specific user to an entity because they don't need to see that holistic view. So we can actually come in and say, Mike needs to be restricted to the foundation. And that means when Mike logs in, he's only going to see the foundation. He will not see this drop down that this controller can see. He'll only be able to view reporting in the foundation. He'll only be able to transact in the foundation. And we can do this for 1 or more entities. So if Mike needs the foundation and the community center, that's totally possible. We can add both of those here for him to access, but then we're restricting him from the clinic because we're not giving him that access that the clinic has. One other note on inter-entity in Intacct. With multiple entities in one environment, the big benefit of this is the ability to automate our inter-entity transactions. So in a case where we have an inter-entity bill, so we'll keep that example of the foundation, the clinic, and the community center. I've got an accounts payable bill here that was coded to the foundation. If I come in and pay this bill with a bank account owned by a different entity, so in this example, our accounts payable was in the foundation. We actually paid this with a bank account owned by the community center. What happens in Intacct using mapping tables that we set up prior to going live is that the inter-entity piece of this is completely automated. So this is our journal that's posting when we're actually paying this bill. This journal below was not manually created. It was automatically created based on the fact that we have a transaction that's hitting two different entities, foundation and community center. So all of my nonprofits that are multi-entity utilize those mapping tables and these inter-entity features if they ever have transactions that are going to occur between two entities. So this is just one example. Any inter-entity transaction, this idea rings true in Intacct. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into grants and restriction releases, which will be our final topic, and then we'll open it up to any Q&A. So the same way, so far we've looked at departments as a dimension. We saw that. We're going to look at, we looked at location/entities with our foundation, clinic, and community center. Let's take a look at grants next. So same idea behind grants that I have behind my department dimension. These live in a separate list. So they're in their own unique dimension. What this allows me to do, just like with the department dimension, is I can tag anything that I'd like in the system, whether that be an invoice or an AP bill or a purchasing document or a journal entry or a budget. I can tag any of that to a grant. So we'll focus on two types of grants. One, let's take a look at this community resilience and enrichment grant that we were granted by the Harmony Foundation. And what I'll do here is I'm going to open up a report as we go through this example, just to see how this grant tagging can impact our reporting. So I'm going to go ahead and run just a statement of revenue and expenditures for this community resilience grant. And at the moment, all I'm going to see in here is my budget for this grant. So as I just mentioned, once you have a grant living in a dimension, you can create a separate budget for it. So I've got my grant revenue, my budgeted expenditures that I'm expecting. Let's go ahead, and we see nothing in the actual column. Let's go ahead and go out and post a grant invoice. So let's say that the Harmony Foundation, this grant goes through, we're ready to post it. We post our grant invoice, and we'll just continue coming back to this report just to see the impacts on reporting. Now we're seeing 120K in grant revenue. Now, maybe this is a grant where we receive the 120K and then we begin to spend using that grant. We can go ahead and come in and let's take a look at the other side of things, the expense side. So we come into a purchasing document, look at a vendor invoice here. I'm going to go ahead and post this expense that I have tagged to the community resilience grant. I'll go ahead and post this. And then I'm going to go ahead and refresh again. And I'm going to see this 10625 in expenses posted here. Now, let's say that in this particular case, the original grant revenue that we received was restricted revenue. But as we spend against the grant, we need to release that revenue from restriction. A lot of our clients prior to using Intacct actually do that manually with combined reporting and journal entries. But Intacct actually has a feature that allows us to automate the release of that restricted revenue. So what I'll do now is I'll come into my general ledger, and this is a baseline feature. There's no additional cost to this. I can come in, generate a restriction release, and then down here in the bottom right, I'm going to select my funding source that I'm looking to release, and then I'll click generate. We're just waiting for this to process. So we had a pass here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happened. So in this case, that $10,625 that I've spent that was previously sitting in a revenue account, we've taken that with that restriction release generation and released it, moved it out of temporarily restricted where it was originally sitting, and moved it into without restriction. And just to show you one other report example here and how these restrictions factor into our reporting, let me go ahead and try to run this for my grant. Great. So this is another revenue and expenditure report, but what we're really seeing here is once we do that release restriction, we had that 120,000 sitting in a with donor restrictions bucket, but with that automated feature, not only are we removing the need to manually create that restriction release, we're also able to capture that in reporting. So my 10,625 moves out of with donor restrictions into without donor restrictions. And then to wrap in this last 3 minutes, I just want to cover one other grant scenario just to show you all how Intacct can help us get more efficient with these grants. So we'll come into our grant list again. And previously we looked at this community resilience and enrichment grant. Let's take a look at this cultural bridges grant. So in this example, let's imagine that this is actually a reimbursable grant where we get reimbursed based on the terms of the grant as we spend against it. So I have a variety of invoices sitting out here. So these cultural bridges invoices, these are all amounts that I've spent against this grant. And the same exact way we've seen that dimensional tagging throughout the demo, I have the ability to tag these expenses to this grant. What I'm able to do in Intacct is come in and generate invoices for expenses that have been tagged to a particular grant. What I mean by that is I can come in and let's say I want to filter by my cultural bridges grant. When I preview, I'm going to see every expense that I've created that has been tagged to this grant. And then what I can do is I'm able to generate an invoice here that I can then send out to the grantor to have them reimburse me. And when I do create this invoice, one great feature, so let me go ahead and slide this email on my screen to finish up here. So one great feature of Intacct is I can completely customize the body of this email. I can completely customize the invoice that the grantor is going to receive. So this is just a very basic invoice with no customization. And the other thing that I can do when I'm sending out these invoices for reimbursable grants is I can attach any supporting documentation behind the expense. So in this case, I created an accounts payable bill. I attached this JPEG just as an example. And then when the grantor receives their invoice, they're also going to receive supporting documentation behind any of those invoices that I spent against that grant. All right, let me stop the share and then Michelle, hand it back over to you to. Great. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that came through. So I see one that says, are saved reports shown to everyone or only the individual user's preferences? So it depends. You can either create a report and then you can decide to only permission that report to yourself, or you can allow the full org to see it, or you can also select specific groups at the organization who can see it. So either is possible. You can show a report to everyone, or you can have it be an individual user report. Yes, the system can handle multi-currency. Yes. And we can follow up and maybe schedule a demo of that. We won't have time to show that today. Let's see. Approvals for requisition. So I can speak a bit to that. So we do have the ability to set up approvals throughout the requisition process, and those approvals and how we set them up are dependent on your organization and how you want to set them up. We can name specific users to approve all requisitions. We can also have it be entity-based. So if you're in a multi-entity environment, we can certainly have those route to specific users in each entity. We can also do department or cost center-based approvals where requisitions are going to specific department managers. And then within each of those options, we can do thresholds and tiers. So we could say, let's say Michelle and I are in the marketing department. Michelle needs to approve everything 0 to 30,000. Then if it's in the marketing department and it's above 30,000, I need to approve it. We can definitely do that as well. Let's see. Grants, is the grant detail coming from the grant management module is a question. Yes, so the grants themselves and the list of grants live in that grant module. And then once the grant is added to that grant module, we have the ability to tag it throughout the system. So the starting point for the grant is within that grant management module. Let's see. Do we have a report like the statement of activity that can include statistical accounts? Yes, you can include statistical accounts in any report. So we would pull those in the report example we saw, we just pulled in financial accounts, but yes, we can also pull statistical account information in those same exact reports. So you can present both financial and statistical accounts in one report. Yes, security filters by entity and department. Those are actually the only two filters on a user. So you either can filter, or you can filter by both entity and by department. Jane, we'll get back to you on the multi-language. We can maybe Michelle follow up with Jane. She asked if we have multi-language as well as multi-currency. We do. I would just need to send over a list of which languages we have. And then automation and integration, especially around bills. Yes, so David asked if I could talk a little bit about automation and integration around bills. There is an AP automation feature in Intacct. The way that that works is probably similar to any AP automation that you've seen with a third party. So each entity is assigned an email address. You forward those AP bills into that email address, and then they're captured in Intacct, and the system starts to learn and guess coding based on similar PDFs that it's seen. The other options, so there is that native AP automation within Intacct. There are also tons of third parties. So if you are already using a third party like Ramp or File with another ERP and you want to stick with that third party, the majority of those third parties have an integration with Sage Intacct. So you can either use the Intacct integration, or sorry, Intacct native AP automation, or you can use a third party and then integrate it into Intacct. And then I just see a note here from Jane, Thai, French, Spanish, which I will write that down and we'll get back to you on that, Jane, and give you some specifics on that. I think we're right at time, Michelle, and I don't see any other questions. There's just a couple of resources here, so we'll send out this deck after the fact. This is just a case study of a nonprofit that went live on Intacct earlier this year, and just a data sheet on using Sage Intacct for nonprofits. Great. Well, thank you all for joining today's webinar. If you want to learn more about Sage Intacct for your nonprofit organization or schedule a personalized demo, you can always email us, and that address is going to be inquire@compudata.com. Great. Thank you all so much.